Alamogordo, New Mexico. White Sands Proving Ground, July 16, 1945. Early in the morning, a number of U.S. military officers and scientists gathered to watch a powerful new weapon being tested. Some believe the device will be a complete failure. Others think it might destroy the entire state of New Mexico. As a precaution, viewing stations are placed from 10 to 20 miles away from the test site. At precisely 5:29 and 45 seconds, the first atomic bomb is detonated.
3, 2, 1, fire!
The blast emits a fireball over 600 feet wide and produces an explosion equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. The mushroom cloud reaches over 7 miles in height, and the reverberations can be felt nearly 100 miles away. The world had a new weapon, one so terrifying it left even its creator, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, shocked and shaken.
Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent.
For the first time in its history, the Earth had been assaulted by a man-made weapon of incredible power. But what if it had all happened before? What if an explosion of even greater force and destructiveness had long ago shaped the Earth's history? Atomic warfare among ancient civilizations may sound like something out of a science fiction novel, but descriptions of similar deadly occurrences can be found in the very same text Dr. Oppenheimer quoted after the New Mexico atomic test.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Part of an ancient Hindu scripture known as the Mahabharata. The Bhagavad Gita was written sometime between the 5th and 2nd century BC. This massive 100,000-verse text contains stories about the ancient empire of Rama, which it is said existed over 12,000 years ago, or roughly 5,000 years before the earliest recorded civilization in Mesopotamia.
If you read the ancient Indian epics, they read like modern-day science fiction. Yet they're thousands of years old, with references not only of flying chariots and of these gods that had these incredible technological capabilities, but incredible weapons that they used in those epic battles.
They had what was called a Brahma weapon. There were many people that were singed and burned and melted by the Brahma weapon.
Ancient astronaut theorists believe the Brahma weapon was an early nuclear device because the descriptions of its deadly after effects are eerily similar to the effects of exposure to intense radiation. It is a theory largely discounted by conventional science.
There is no evidence that a nuclear bomb was described in the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita. It describes a battle. In battles there are explosions, big explosions.
It's one thing about suggesting that, battles have explosions, but that's not really what we're looking at. You gotta look at the whole picture. One reference that we have, for example, speaks of these explosions that were brighter than 1,000 suns. And when these blasts occurred, the suns were twirling in the air. Trees went up in flames, and there was just this mass destruction. After those blasts, people who survive started to lose their hair and nails started to fall out. I mean, right there we have a concise reference to radiation poisoning, nuclear fallout. And those texts are thousands of years old.
But if the Mahabharata is based on fact, wouldn't archaeologists have uncovered physical or radiological evidence? According to ancient astronaut theorists, they have. The Indus Valley, southern Pakistan. In 1922, an officer with an Indian Archaeological Survey Group discovered the ruins of an ancient city known as Mohenjo-Daro. According to mainstream archaeologists, the city, whose name means Mound of the Dead, had flourished between 2600 and 1900 BC. However, scientists in Pakistan have suggested Mohenjo-Daro is much older. Mainstream archaeologists believe the city was abandoned as a result of climatic changes, or possibly a decrease in trade. But when the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro were discovered in the 1920s, 44 skeletons were found lying face down in the street, many holding hands. Their faces and body positioning suggested they suffered a sudden, violent death.
You have a culture of people who literally were lying dead in the street. Archaeologists have found human remains, and something big has happened to these people.
What in fact did happen to the people of Mohenjo-Daro? Why is there evidence that wild animals avoided scavenging their remains? And why, even after thousands of years, had their bones not decayed?
In certain areas of that site, you find increased levels of radiation. And radiation exists all over the place. When all of a sudden you have higher levels of radiation in certain areas of the world, the question arises, why?
Is it possible that Mohenjo-Daro was one of the cities mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita? A city that suffered the equivalent of a sudden atomic attack. In his 1979 book, Atomic Destruction in 2000 BC, British researcher David Davenport claimed to have found a 50-yard-wide epicenter at Mohenjo-Daro, where everything appeared to have been fused through a transformative process known as vitrification.
Vitrification is a process in which regular type stone gets molten into a magma state, and then it hardens again. But once the stone is hardened again, it feels like glass. At Mohenjo-Daro, we find evidence of vitrification, which could have only been achieved if the material was exposed to extreme heat by some type of a blast.
When British and Indian and Pakistani archaeologists began doing excavations in the Sindh Desert on the borders of India and Pakistan in the late 1940s and early 1950s, what they found in these cities, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Kotdiji, was archaeological evidence to show there were apparently atomic weapons, only it happened in ancient times. There's other evidence in parts of Africa and the Middle East where it would seem to be like some sort of atomic explosion had taken place there and had turned the desert sand into glass. And that's exactly what happened at Alamogordo in New Mexico when they detonated the first atom bomb in the desert.
Could the strange ruins found in the Indus Valley really contain evidence of an ancient atomic explosion? If so, where did these powerful weapons come from? Who was using them, and why?
In the ancient Indian texts themselves, it says, and I quote, at one point 3 giant cities were orbiting the Earth. And those giant cities were often described as being made of gleaming metal and iron. And at one point, those 3 cities went to war with each other. And it's described how the gods threw weapons at each other, destroying those cities. That they all went up in flames and fire came raining down onto Earth. So when you read those passages, the question I ask is, what is it that our ancestors try to describe here? And I think that it was some type of a technology that was witnessed, yet our ancestors, while being highly intelligent, didn't understand the nuts and bolts aspects behind that technology. And so they created something divine out of it, something supernatural, yet it never was divine, it never was supernatural.
If in fact the Mahabharata is describing historical events, might we also find similar accounts in other ancient writings?